Hello, hello, hello. It is me, your True Hill Phenom SP3, and we are back once again with our final Dark Side of the Ring Season 1 review. This one is talking all about the career and controversy of the Fabulous Moolah. I am back once again with the Princess of all the True Hills, Miss Krssi Luv.
Hello, hello,
Woo!
hello.
And our resident True Hill alcoholic on vacation again, Mr. Top Guy JJ.
What's up? What's up? What's going on? It's kind of early for some alcohol, so I might take this one off.
Not a true alcoholic then.
Yep.
Fair
I was
enough.
drink
And
I was drinking till 2 o'clock in the morning last night, so I need a couple hours off.
And because this is a big season 1 Dark Side of the Ring review for our final one for the Fabulous Moolah, we had to bring in an expert. We had to bring in someone who knows all about this controversy. She's read books, she's seen documentaries, and she is a very educated woman when it comes to women's professional wrestling. This is the lovely Miss Lucy T WWE.
Hey,
Welcome.
I am. I've got my book. I've got I'm a total nerd with this shit, but I'm so excited to be here and thank you so much for having me on this like amazing podcast. I love you guys so much.
Thank you so much for coming on. And you have like so much background. Been bringing the women's wrestling fan community together. So I really want to like commend you on that because
Thank you.
I'm a man that tries to bring the women's together. So it's not as effective as a woman like you kind of bringing them all together and united them. So I love what you do.
Thank you. And I think that's it's something really interesting about just the Fabulous Moolah's legacy, good or bad. And we can talk about this kind of as we get into it, Chris. But I think it really hits on just society pinning women against women, no pun intended. And so I think there's sort of a very unique thing at play there. But we can talk about that when we get to it. But
Of course, of course. I have to start off every Dark Side of the Ring review asking Miss Krssi Luv, what was your overall thoughts on this episode?
That is still not finished. It's still it's like a to be continued. You know, it's like a movie, and it's like it needs a sequel. Like the next chapter, I needed to finish. So it's like she said, it kind of like showed the evolution of women, but then it like was putting women against women. If that made sense.
No, we will explain all about that to the fine viewers at home. But before we get into anything and telling you this journey of Fabulous Moolah, this is a reminder to you, push the like button. We want a thumbs up. We want to make this our most thumbs up review for our Dark Side of the Ring reviews. And of course, there's the iCard down at the bottom. You can push that to subscribe and the bell to stay notified for all the great content right here on True Hill Heat. So we got to start off our story at the beginning. At the beginning of this episode, we are introduced to the daughter of the Fabulous Moolah, Mary Austin, who is the only child of Moolah. Mary speaks about the flamboyant costumes and outfits that Fabulous Moolah used to wear. We also are introduced to one of Moolah's early trainees, Selena Majors, aka Bambi. And next, of course, is your favorite, Miss Krssi Luv, your favorite talking head on Dark Side of the Ring, Mr. Jim Cornette.
Yep.
I'm gonna call him your Uncle Jimmy from now on. Uncle Jimmy talks about starting in the business as a photographer, meeting Moolah by taking pictures at the shows, and they talk about at the
With the pictures and photography of like back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, that was like a good start to kind of get your foot in the door. I know like people like Paul Heyman was another one that kind of started off as a photographer in the business as well. Cornette talks about how women were banned at Madison Square Garden and how Moolah was the one that chosen to break this. So I don't think that's like really like harped on enough in this episode.
Right,
So like, what do you ladies think? I'll ask Lucy first. What's your thoughts on like Moolah, the fact that Moolah at 60 years old was chosen to be like the first one really at a very older age for her to be the first one to kind of break that barrier of a woman being at MSG.
I think this answer alone needs an hour and a half. There's two sides sides of the coin on this, because on one hand, you could look at it and you could say, oh, wow, this is really great. They're picking someone like Moola, who has accomplished so much for women's wrestling. She's been undefeated for like 30 years. She's just such a character in and of herself. And she's older. So good job for, not picking just like a hot young thing. But then on the other side of the coin, you could also look at it with criticism and say, well, so they're making a mockery of her. We're going to get some funny 6-year-old woman in the ring who we know can take bumps and we know is just so fame hungry, because she was at that point. She was her whole life, but especially then, to just exploit the fuck out of her and then have it be a laugh. And I think that that's sort of the way that I kind of take her breaking that kind of ban of women in the ring there, especially at Madison Square Garden. It's interesting too, because the evolution of women's wrestling, like in the 20s and 30s, it was like a thing.
Yeah.
Like in the 20s and the 40s, like it was like a thing. And then when all the men came home from war, it was like, oh, okay, we're actually good now. We don't need the women to entertain us anymore. And that's when it kind of went back underground. And so it just has such an interesting life cycle. Yeah. And so I don't know. I mean, I think there's so many different ways to look at this. And to Krissi's point, it's such a to be continued, because it really is a lot of he said, she said, she said, he said, she said, she didn't say, he didn't say, she said. And again, there wasn't social media back then. So there was no like, you said you were like this, but look, you tweeted this like 4 years ago. So like your true colors are showing, bitch. Like there was none of that. So it's the whole thing is just shrouded in such mythic mystery. But so that's sort of my take on them inviting Moola back, and as her being the one to sort of break that barrier, because to Wendy Richter's point in the episode, it was such a slap in the face. It was such a backhanded like era in the 70s and 80s. Like, so there's just a lot of, I would say the whole question is really fraught with a lot of contradictions in and of itself. I don't know. That was a really long-winded answer. I'm sorry.
No. It's a very muddy water, so it's hard to come up with like a coherent answer really about this, because Moolah has such a polarizing like viewpoint due to her controversy. So they talk about at the age of 60 years old, Fabulous Moolah got her mainstream fame and had the biggest payoff of her career by taking part in the rock and wrestling boom, feuding with Wendy Richter, which we'll go more in depth on when Wendy is introduced. But they also talk about Mary, her daughter, talks about Moolah having to fight at a very young age. At that age, Moolah discovered the famous women's wrestler Mildred Burke. Cornette also talks about how Mildred Burke and her husband, Billy Wolf, controlled the women's wrestling business for both good and bad. When she was 17 years old, Moolah met Billy Wolf, which if you wanted to wrestle under him, you had to sleep with him if you were a female wrestler, which Moolah refused to do. Moolah then met her future husband, Buddy Lee, and copied from the Mildred Burke playbook. They created their own troupe of women's wrestlers to control the bookings throughout the wrestling world. Top Guy JJ, what's your thoughts on the introduction and the character that we were described as Buddy Lee?
Oh, wow. You leave me with the buddy. You leave me with probably the biggest scumbag of the entire show. Like, to some, I guess this is how things were back then, but it's so hard to imagine that this was the way of life back then. Like, it was literally a full out just, I have the power, you do what I say, and I hand you the paychecks business. And it's a shameful thing to see. Like, it was like, first of all, he wasn't even a good dude. Like nope. To not even be a good man, to have those kind of demands for anybody who needed to break into his wife's business. It was, when you say you need a lot of time to dive into what type of an asshole this guy was, I don't think that the episode of Dark Side of the Ring that we're covering right now would be enough time, because he is literally what makes, when we talk about things like us as men, is gonna make anything, we can't, we gotta be on, this is a little edgy here with what type of an individual he was, because not only was he extremely manipulative, he had a fat paycheck, he had a fat checkbook, and he presumably, because of the lack of equality there was back then, had all the power. It's just such an ugly thing to have to revisit and to realize that he just basked in all of his glory, no point intended, but he literally just was like king asshole. That's the only thing I could literally put to it, is like he was literally the worst type of example for a man with money that you can see on camera.
Especially in the wrestling business, for sure. We then moved the talk to the introduction of the Fabulous Moolah Battle Royal controversy, which went down in 2018. We hear all the news notes and comments about Moolah's past that were drug up when WWE made the decision to call their all women's Battle Royal at WrestleMania 34 the Fabulous Moolah Battle Royal. Cornette talks about the rumors about Moolah abusing her talents and taking advantage of the girls. We also meet Nigel Sherrod, who started the Fight for Moolah campaign. Nigel speaks about interviewing 20 women who all said Moolah did not do those things that they said. But we also meet the son of Sweet Georgia Brown, Michael McCoy, who is a pastor in South Carolina. We also meet Barbara Harsey, who was the daughter of Sweet Georgia Brown. Sweet Georgia Brown was one of the first female black wrestlers in the world. Harsey explains how their mother told them that she was forced to do things under Moolah's control. So, what was your thoughts on hearing about the introduction of Sweet Georgia Brown, Miss Krssi Luv?
It was very wonderful to see someone of color that was in the mainstream and that was actually really big and was going places. Very excited to find out, even though it's her, as her daughter said, it was like she heard other stories from like her aunt and her mom told her other things, but you know the glorious side didn't find out was like she was gonna be big, but unfortunately they didn't want her to get the title from Moolah, and then she was a woman of color, so those things were kind of like held her back. So it was kind of like, you know, kind of breaking the barriers and like see something that was like beautifully shown that this lady was like, you know, at the forefront and was like the first to do it.
So you could technically tell her kids took like honor in the fact that she was such a pioneer in the business.
Yeah.
We see a banner at Harsey's house with all the female wrestlers that Sweet Georgia Brown used to train with. Cornette talks about for over 20 years, all the female wrestlers were trained and controlled by Moolah. Mary speaks about Moolah training Sweet Georgia Brown in the living room of her home. And we also meet Georgia Brown's other son, Kenny McCoy. He talks a story about how his mom was a famous wrestler and how she was number 4 ranked in the world in 1964. Brown's daughter explains how the KKK were after Brown while she was wrestling due to her being such a prominent African-American figure in the wrestling business. And the children speaks about having to stay with their aunt who treated them poorly due to them being half-breed kids. Every time Brown would return home, she was pregnant with another child, with which her aunt always mentioned the point out there. Harsey talks about a story about a man pulling her away from pulling Sweet Georgia Brown away from the kids on a visit home, and the man is suspected to be Buddy Lee. She talks about her mother felt controlled by Moolah and Buddy Lee. Harsey tells a story about her mother being made to drink and then made to have sex with a promoter, which was a form of prostitution in the wrestling business. So, Lucy T, I gotta ask you, because you know like a lot of like the background and stuff. How prominent was this type of form of business in the wrestling world at this time?
It was very common, and I think that you sort of have to look at everything with this story through the lens of its time. So another thing as well that is in this book, Sisterhood of the Squared Circle, is that Mae Young and the Fabulous Moolah, you know, they were like BFFs. So when they came up together in the early days, they would actually drug and steal money from men and leave them on the side of the road. So, which is like actually pretty badass, right? But like, so you think about Fabulous Moolah, and you're sort of like, well, I wouldn't be so surprised that she would be like, honey, why don't you just make sure he has a good time and he'll treat you like right. That was sort of her, and I sort of feel like you had to be like that in order to have any success or be taken seriously at all as a woman in wrestling. And it hasn't really changed. The medium has changed a little bit because now it's like, oh, you have to be, Becky Lynch, and you have to be taking a chair to the face and bleeding all over the place to be then you're taken seriously. So there's just sort of different languages, I guess, that women constantly have to adapt to in order to be taken seriously. And they usually have to go the extreme. Something else interesting about Mildred Burke and her husband is Billy Wolf had married her at like 14. Like he saw her in a wrestling ring at like 13 or 14. And she was like, I want to go live with him. And her parents were like, okay. Like, I mean, it was such a different time. And in terms of sort of like the criticism around, did she kind of pimp out her girls? Did she not? I think that regardless of, and this is going to sound so bad, but I'm just playing devil's advocate, but regardless of if she did or she didn't, she was a very uncouth character, to say the least. So you'll look at someone like, technically, Stone Cold has allegations of domestic abuse.
Yeah.
No one cares about that because everyone fucking loves Stone Cold. But when it's the Fabulous Moolah, all of a sudden you gotta fight her name, and all of a sudden you gotta take her off the battle royal.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like where my brain was at the time. Is at first I was like, oh wow, that's good on WWE, but then I was like, well, but is it? Because all the fans get all riled up about Fabulous Moolah's past, but I mean, people still, are big Chris Benoit fans, like, and still make tributes to him, like, but no one bats their eye at that, right? Like, so I can't help but wonder if, and I think that she just was tough as nails, and she learned that from a very early age. And I think that being tough as nails in that time and in that business at the time, being a woman, that's what it probably meant.
It was
What, Krssi?
I said it was that era that you had, like, women had to, like, defend and, like, be strong to get ahead.
Yeah, like it was really, really extremely unfortunate. And I'm not condoning any of her behavior whatsoever. I'm not, but it just sort of, I think it's important to kind of analyze and look at everything with like context.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. Because honestly, when you just told me that Mildred Burke story, I was like, "This sounds like Surviving R. Kelly." Like the parents just let her go live with this older gentleman. Like what?
Like it was just such a different time.
It just kind of just shows that literally after all the things that she had to do to survive and to get by, it just shows how damaging the affiliation with Buddy Lee was. It just shows how deep and how damaging that was to her, because most of the stories that came out about her was his fault.
Yeah,
it's true. It's definitely true. So we talk more about Moolah when she found Buddy Lee in bed with one of her trainees. So Moolah,
I can't. Like, I just
careful what you wish for, Moolah.
Yo, he is. Yo, that's what I'm like. It's just a storm show of shit from him, yo.
So Moolah kicked out Buddy out of the house, and some of the wrestlers went with Buddy, while others stayed with Moolah. One of the wrestlers that went with Buddy was Sweet Georgia Brown. Pastor McCoy talks about him visiting Moolah when he wanted to find out who his real biological father was, and Moolah just shows him a picture of Buddy Lee standing next to Sweet Georgia Brown on her wall. And Mary Austin, Moolah's daughter, confirms that Sweet Georgia Brown used to sleep with these men, and that Michael is an example of that. That Buddy used to sleep with Sweet Georgia Brown as well, confirming that yes, she believes that Buddy Lee is Michael's father. Harsey talks about her uncle burning everything wrestling for her mother, basically to cleanse her. And Pastor McCoy says, with all the abuse that she received, she was still South Carolina's first black female wrestler, and she should be honored. So, Miss Krssi Luv, do you believe that Sweet Georgia Brown deserves more recognition than she already has?
Yeah, she should get the accolades. It's unfortunate that it was that time and that era. It was like segregation and everything. So they kind of not going to like play her or give her the accolades they need. But her children are there to like kind of keep that alive and show that she did do this and she did pave a way for other female wrestlers like Sasha Banks and Ember Rose. Ember Rose. Ember Rose. Jesus Christ. Ember Moon.
Ember Moon. We got you.
You know what I'm trying to say. So it's like she definitely does deserve the accolades because again, when I didn't know who she was until I saw this documentary. So it makes me want to find out more about her.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This would have been the perfect thing to see this season with obviously what's going on now, so we could get a higher level of exposure of Sweet Georgia Brown. Like, listen, I fell in love when I heard the name Sweet Georgia Brown. I mean, come on, man. Like, how culturally perfect is that? Like, Sweet Georgia Brown. It's just like it was so like oh god, she had to be a doll.
Absolutely. So then the conversation moves more into Mullah's training school, where it was basically the premier place to learn wrestling for female wrestlers. In Columbia, South Carolina, Cornette explains, there is Moola Drive and the house that Moola built. There was a property where all the female wrestlers lived and trained in professional wrestling. Cornette talks about how you had to work with Moola to find any bookings in the business. We then meet Mullah's most infamous rival, as Lucy mentioned before, Wendy Richter. Wendy talks about seeing Moolah at a wrestling show, at her first show that she ever went to, and saying that she could beat her to her friends. The referee gave Wendy Mullah's number, who invited Wendy to come to Moola Drive to learn the business. We then also meet Princess Victoria, who came from who herself claimed that she came from an abusive childhood that prepared her for professional wrestling. Her trainer tells her that she has to go to Moola to get bookings in the business, and since she loved the business so much, she decides to go to Moola Drive. Victoria talks about the gates of the property being locked at night, so if you didn't come home on time, you would be locked out. We also hear about
I've had that though with like ex-boyfriends. Like that's not that crazy. If you're home 2 hours after said you're gonna come home, I'm fucking locking the door. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like it still happens to this day.
I mean, it happens with parents. It's gonna happen with my kids. Watch.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
It's all right. So we basically also hear about a midget wrestler named Katie, who worked at the compound. Victoria talks about getting beer onto the property. She was known for that on the property, and drinking them with Katie by the river. Wendy talks about training and doing drop kick after drop kick in the ring, and basically that was all she ever really had to learn. Victoria talks about there was buckets being surrounded around the ring for when they would puke, and we saw visuals of that, of course.
Yeah.
They do that everywhere, though. They did that on that stupid show where they were recruiting for WWE superstars on MTV. They do that at, the Heart Dodge. Like, that's not an insane thing to wear out your wrestler. Like, you watch the Ric Flair 30 for 30. He's talking about how his wrestling coach made them carry each other up 25 flights of stairs until they puked. Like, that's not a new thing. But because she was a woman, it's like this cruel, insane thing. Like,
yep.
Come on.
Yeah. No, a lot of it just seemed like I was like, okay, that happens at a lot of schools. I agree with you. I was just like, I don't know if that's one thing to complain about. But they talk about the one thing, this is Wendy, talks about the one thing that Moolah taught her was to take a bite and growl. Wendy says that that Moola took the money and had the girls train her. She didn't really teach her anything. And then Victoria talks about Moola was being paid $300 from each of the four girls living at the house a month, and while also taking a percentage of their bookings. We hear a soundbite about Moola with her talking about making bookings, and she just seemed very nonchalant about the fact that she was taking all of the money of the females. So, what was your thoughts on this little soundbite from Moola, Top Guy JJ?
This is I'm swear I'm just sticking to my my story and thinking this is literally all from but this is all from Buddy Lee. Like all of this shit here, this is all Buddy Lee's influence. Like all of these horrible decisions. Like I mean, come on, damn. First you got the girls paying all of this money to stay there, and then you're taking their percentages of the booking. How the hell are they supposed to pay you if you're already taking their money from the booking? Thanks, Buddy Lee. Thanks for just poisoning her mind and literally just ruining any goodness that you could have left in her for paving the way for so many other, because so many other women would have taken this adventure if this would have been handled a little bit differently. But she was kind of in this middle funk already, and she was already kind of poisoned by this dude, and this is the start of what we started to see.
Also,
unfortunately,
it's also when she was fighting with the other promotion when she first started wrestling. I forget the name of the two people, the lady and her husband. She learned it from them as well.
Mildred Burke and Billy Wolf.
So she got it from Mildred and Mr. Wolf, and you know her and Buddy did the same thing. And then when Buddy left, she was like, "Well, this is how I know how to make money, and I know that it will keep me going." And they said that she loved money. So what other ways to take advantage of people that want to learn wrestling and be in the business? And I'm going to book them, but you still got to pay me. And I'm going to give you a roof over your head, and So
you got to pay me for the roof, and you got to pay me for the lessons, and you got to pay me for working. Like where am I winning? Where am I coming off at? This is not an attractive business.
No, it seems like you're getting like pennies to be like someone's slave, pretty much, for lack of a better term. So Victoria talks about how Moolah gave her like her most expensive ring outfit, and the fact that Moolah couldn't even just give it to her personally. She had to do it in front of all the other girls. Victoria, and this is in my notes I put here. I was like, Victoria doesn't seem all there, honestly. Like there was just moments where she
yells at the dogs.
Yes.
I was just about to say that, Lucy. Oh my God. She's like, shut up. And then she's like, oh, what was I saying? Oh yeah. And then she just starts talking again. And he was like,
she did not seem 100% there at all. Like
I said that she was always the person to bring all the beers and everything to the house, all the girls.
Katie. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. I met her.
It's something really like it draws all the way back to then, I want to say.
Yeah. And also, this is just another sidebar about Katie, is that she was also sort of like a second daughter to Moolah. And so in Lipstick and Dynamite, highly recommend checking that out. Well, my hand just looked really weird. Highly recommend checking that out because it's basically just Moolah and Katie like walking around town for an hour and a half, like talking to each other about all of these questions that the documentary makers are asking them. She was also a very interesting character.
I agree. Victoria speaks about her hurting her neck in the ring where a girl sits on her head. We actually see the footage of this, and it looks like a freak accident, but looks like it really must have hurt her. She retells the story of her being in the hospital and getting under the anesthesia, and then waking up back at the house where she was in bed, and Moolah had her still take bumps in the ring the following day. Yep. After a month or two with her dealing with her neck, Moolah tells Victoria to see a guy in Holland for a payday. Moolah tells Victoria after her conversation with the man, after Victoria tells the man they will be staying in separate rooms, that she says, and I quote, "The nicer you are to him, the nicer he will be to you." So what's your thoughts on this little story that Victoria tells about this gentleman in Holland and how Moolah was upset with her that she wasn't that nice to him in Holland? Krssi Luv.
It's just sad that unfortunately, just like we were been saying, like she's just a product of like what she grew up from. Like she's seen it, so she figured this is how she makes money. And since the girl is injured and she's not really going to be, wrestling, what other way for her to bring money to me and for herself to put a little change in her pocket is by going to see this man and give him a little, a little something. But the lady, almost broke his arm and killed him and left. So it just shows that it's just like so sad to exploit this poor lady. But again, this was back in that time, and it was very common. They had brothels and things of such nature. So it's just it's that time and that era, and it's unfortunate. Like Moola is just a product of what she grew up in. What she didn't know anything else. That's what I'm noticing and seeing. Not saying that it's okay and it's right, but this is what she, this is what she knew. This is how she wanted to make money and how she wanted to keep, going. So it's unfortunate for for a girl.
Yeah, it's sad. It's a sad but true case that they had to live through. So when Moolah was upset with her for not being that nice to the gentleman in Holland, Moolah took the outfits back from her to pay the rent, and then kicked
That
Victoria.
was so petty.
You gave me
I was like, okay, Moolah, I see you.
Like, you didn't say I could borrow it. You gave it to me, so I should be able to take it.
I want the brown outfit and the pink sequin outfit. Like, oh my God, what a savage bitch. Also, can I just say one more thing about that experience?
Yeah.
I love that she was like, I mean, he wasn't just hit by the ugly stick. He was hit by the whole tree.
Yeah, he was hit by the whole damn thing.
or yeah, whatever she said, being like, he was so busted. Oh my God.
That seems like a type of man that would pay for a trip for a woman to Holland to do some fun things with and be nice to him.
I hope she got some chocolate or something.
Nice to him.
If you don't go to Holland for the chocolate, you're not going there for a good reason.
For Holland, yeah.
So when Victoria left the property after being kicked out by Moolah told the girls that Victoria had been arrested for cocaine possession.
Oh my God! Like
in another low maneuver by.
I think she made that up.
Well, yeah. Maybe. We go back to Wendy Ricker, who speaks about the personal animosity between her and Moolah after Wendy broke out in the WWF, and she was hired under the WWF and Vince McMahon. Wendy says that she went to Vince and asked to have her payment made to her directly and not to Moolah. She also told him that she did not want to live with Moolah anymore. Around this time, this is when Captain Lou Albano took a flight with Cyndi Lauper, which started him telling everyone that he was Cyndi Lauper's manager. And then, and then of course, Captain Lou wound it up in the Girls Just Want to Have Fun video, which really kickstarted the rock and wrestling era. To build up to the rock and wrestling era and the Brawl to End It All on MTV, Lou chose Fabulous Moolah to represent him against Cyndi Lauper, while Cyndi Lauper chose Wendy Richter. This was the first big push for women's wrestling in the business and seen as a turning point for the industry. At this time, Vince wanted Wendy to be the next Hulk Hogan of the women's division. So what's your viewpoint on the whole rock and wrestling era and this one feud between Wendy Richter and Fabulous Moolah, Lucy T?
Well, first of all, I mean, I love Cyndi Lauper. Girls Just Want to Have Fun is like probably one of my favorite movies of all time. So I love going back and seeing that rock and wrestling connection. And I don't know. I have such mixed. I know I'm like the worst person to have all these things because I have such mixed feelings about everything. But I feel like had I been a little girl during that era, I would have. I mean, I'm 31, but anyway. But I would have, if I was 10, I would have probably loved Wendy Richter. I mean, she had the big sunglasses, she had the big hair, she was really pretty. She was, I think she was also one of the first female wrestlers that actually looked a little bit more feminine, but wasn't one of the bikini clad wrestlers. Mm-hmm. So I think that was sort of one of the things that made her very marketable that I'm sure Vince was drooling all over. It's interesting sort of, watching them kind of talk about, oh my God, I was on the roof for 10 hours that day and I was starving and I was dying of heat and I was so thirsty. And I think that watching that sort of like behind footage with Wendy and Cindy on the roof was interesting because it just again solidifies that wrestling is not a glamorous industry whatsoever, and they kind of touch on that a couple times through this episode as well, with like payment and just life on the road and everything. So I thought that was really interesting, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I do have stuff to say too when it gets to how the match ends.
Yeah, yes. Well, we got to talk about the Brawl to End It All, where Wendy Richter met Fabulous Moolah for the WWF Women's Championship. Cornette speaks about Vince writing the right number on the check for Moolah to finally drop the title after 28 years. So Wendy Richter is the new WWF Women's Champion. We see Wendy winning the title from Moolah in a great moment at the Brawl to End It All, and it was the big moment for the business, as almost 3 decades of wrestling had not seen any other women's champion besides Fabulous Moolah. Victoria talks about how she felt Moolah let her ego motivate her, and it made her never quit, which led until probably one of the most infamous women's matches of all time. And this is the screw job that is not talked about.
Yes, the screw
I was just thinking that.
Screw jobs, really, man.
Yes, this is a screw job that I wish they would have had a whole episode on. Not the Montreal screw job. We've seen enough of that. Wendy watches footage of an old interview with her and Cyndi Lauper to start off our next segment. Wendy found out early that the men were getting paid a lot more than the woman. Vince did not like Wendy. Yeah, you know.
Shocker.
Wendy. Vince did not like Wendy being vocal about her pay and decided to make the move to take the title off of her. But since it wasn't going to be on Wendy, it had to go back to somebody. So Wendy tells a story of how Moolah about one of the stories of them wrestling on the road, and Moolah putting her in a Boston Crab and trying to break her back.
Breaking her back.
And,
Jesus.
yes, and you saw even from the reenactment, she was really turning back on it. So we then moved to the legendary first screw job as Wendy Richter meets the Spider Lady. Backstage before the match, Wendy says that she sees Fabulous Moolah, but is confused because she's not on the match card, and this is also confirmed by Victoria. Wendy says that the match wasn't good; it was only one move, but we also see the next move, which was the finish, where Spider Lady small packages Wendy. Wendy kicks out at one or two, it seemed like, but the referee still counts the 3 count. We see Moolah is unmasked, and Wendy tells the story of saying she did not know and she did not see this coming. But it was quite obvious to the fans who were chanting Moolah at the Spider Lady, and to Princess Victoria, who also says, yes, it was Moolah, and Victoria says Wendy knew who it was. So what are your guys' thoughts on this whole screw job? And do you guys believe Wendy knew that Spider Lady was Fabulous Moolah?
I think she must have had a hunch. I mean, she was like, "Oh, I fought Spider Lady before, and this was not her size."
Right.
And I mean, I gotta believe that, maybe no one told her before, but I've got to believe that if she was that close, you wrestle with them, their moves, how they look, their height. She had to have had an inkling that it could have possibly been her.
Yeah, it just seems like, how can you not know that was not who you thought you were wrestling? Miss Krssi Luv, what was your thoughts on the whole screw job and the Spider Lady?
I mean, from what I've seen in the video, you can clearly tell if the Spider Lady was a certain way or figure. You can tell that this lady's shape is very off and it looks like Moolah. So it kind of if she said she had an inkling, she kind of had to find out, had a clue a little bit that it was that it was her. But it's unfortunate that you had to play tricks and trick people. We already knew the finishers. You already knew who was gonna win or whatever. So it's why trick me? You already knew you wanted to take it away from me. So what's the whole point of putting the Spider Lady in a different costume for another person to put on?
And that also makes me wonder as well, if, obviously Moolah at that point was such a heel with the fans anyways, but
right.
I also can't help but wonder if again, it was very exploitative. Like, oh, Moolah loves money, so let's just give her, and then it'll be like, oh, Wendy Richter got beat up by this old lady. And sort of not so much as a like respectful thing for Moolah, but more of the fan, like this will be a interesting dynamic and visual to have Wendy Richter get, kind of pinned by Moolah. And then you add in the whole refs. It was just such a screw job and such a shit show. And, the fact that Vince continues to do this to his wrestlers that start to go over. I mean, they were saying in the doc that she was like just as over as Hogan.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think that Vince was ready for women to be taken seriously, because again, Moolah was in a fucking spider costume and she's like 80 years old. Like, that's not taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
She won. Like, and so that's like a whole other
show
thing.
Yeah,
Exactly. And I was very disappointed a little bit, I guess, that Wendy used that and sort of let Vince win and just quit.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna mention next. So Wendy says that she tried to find Vince backstage, but he was nowhere to be found. So Wendy makes the decision to walk away after this incident. Cornette talks about how this entire situation held women's wrestling back for years. Wendy speaks about how Moolah worked against all the women who worked hard for her. Wendy speaks about grabbing her things and leaving town after the screw job, and Wendy still has not gone back and rewatched this screw job match.
Yeah.
So why do you think, Top Guy JJ, that this screw job is not talked about as much as, the Montreal screw job or anything like that?
It's literally just because of what we took from the beginning. It's literally the lack of equality and how it just wasn't as important. It just wasn't as, like, literally seeing the Spider Lady was like, yo, this is the OG Mr. America. this is literally like, how painfully obvious was it? Every fan in attendance knew who this person was, and it just was like, wait a minute, why wasn't this talked about so much more? Because this was literally this was the biggest turn in women's wrestling. This was it. Like, this could have set main events for years to come. But as the lady said, they weren't ready for it. They weren't ready for them to be taken to that level, to be taken seriously. And did they have enough women to challenge for the championship besides the selfish savage Moolah? Because Moolah apparently didn't want to establish anybody else. Like, she just wanted to have a stranglehold on the division for the rest of her life until she couldn't walk anymore. So when she finally got somebody else, and Wendy, there's not many, back even this time of day, right? You don't see that many women that looks like she's a star. Wendy was a damn star. Like, you've seen it. Like, she was gonna be like what it looked like in the beginning of how this era started. She was a star, and Moolah was not having it. She's like, not this young, pretty, blonde girl that looks fabulous and she can move around and she's like 35 years younger than me. Mm-hmm. Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. Like, no. And it's just painfully obvious how that all came about. And Moolah obviously still had some power. So Moolah had some power and she just used it to her fullest extent.
That actually was a pretty good Fabulous Moolah impersonation. I have to give it to you. We see Fabulous Moolah being inducted into the Hall of Fame years later, and how women's wrestling developed in the years to follow with the bra and panties matches and through to the Attitude Era, where Moolah returned for her run with Mae Young in the late 90s and early 2000s. We see all of the footage of the bumps and angles Moolah and Mae Young took part in during the Attitude Era. Then we move on to Moolah's funeral. Mary speaks about how much she misses her mother, and then Cornette speaks about how the rise of women's wrestling shouldn't really be directed to Fabulous Moolah. How the rise of women's wrestling that we see today is directly linked to the rise of women in MMA, especially. Who did he mention? Miss Krssi Luv.
I was mentioning it.
Krssi, who did he mention as the person responsible for the rise of women in wrestling and MMA?
They all start with the same letter.
Yeah. No answer? No answer?
Wait, on a women empowerment episode, girl, you better mention who this person is.
All right, Ronda Rousey, damn. Oh my God. Oh,
Just wanted to make sure you heard her. You heard
Yeah,
him correctly. You know,
MUJJ, whatever.
just making
we
sure.
had to just check,
Uh, Judy, Judy Martin, Peggy Lee, and Liana Kai were all interviewed and all said that Moolah never abused them. Wendy talks about how Moolah broke ground in the wrestling business, but she soon closed the door on many women's careers. Victoria said if Moolah would have left Wendy with the belt, then women's wrestling would be better off for the years that passed after that situation.
Wow.
Cornette kind of put it in a nutshell kind of perfectly towards the end of this. He says that Fabulous Moolah wasn't Mildred Burke, and she definitely wasn't Ronda Rousey, but she was the placeholder for over 40 years. Wow.
Yeah.
What a line.
Yeah.
And then in the 180 to end this whole documentary, in the 180 of the entire Dark Side of the Ring season 1, Princess Victoria goes from calling Fabulous Moolah an asshole to taking offense of all the allegations against Moolah that have gone on over the years. And she says that she believes that Moolah was an asshole, but not a pimp. Because if she was a pimp, then she's a whore. So...
But
yes.
she told you to go to the man's house in Holland. So what? I don't understand it.
She broke the dude's hand though.
That is true. That is true. This like seemed like a very too, like you said at the beginning, Miss Krssi Luv. This was a very to be continued type of ending to this episode. Lucy, what was your overall thoughts on this episode, and more specifically, the 180 that Princess Victoria pulled at the end?
Well, I think Princess Victoria's a little loose in the head. So I like, that was weird. I was like, wait, did I just get amnesia? Like, did I just watch the wrong thing? Like, why is she all of a sudden like, what? But I think that I think it was okay. I think that if you are interested in sort of the ins and outs of Moolah, for example, she made up a bunch of titles. So she was undefeated, but that's because she went around the country making up titles. Yeah. So she'd lose a belt, and then she would say, well, no, that's not a real title anymore. And then she'd make up a new title, and then that would be her belt. And then she was undefeated. So she was such a character and such a crazy Looney Tune. So I honestly think that Lipstick and Dynamite does a much more thorough job of sort of like getting into the allegations, getting into what Moolah was really like. There was a lot of footage of Moolah kind of talking and defending herself as well as people on the other side of it. This, I agree with you guys. I think it was way too short. I also feel like it was just like they just sort of botched a bunch of footage together.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, here's 45 minutes. Okay, we're done with that episode. Okay, now what?
Yeah.
I felt like
compressed.
Yeah.
Compressed.
Yeah. And I feel like they could have taken a bit more time with things. I think it could have been, maybe a 2-parter about just the dark side of the ring, like women's wrestling. And not so focused on Moolah because she was a huge part in it. But, and I really think that we have to be careful as well to not, I'm very disappointed that after that screw job that Wendy Richter left WWF and professional wrestling, because I think that she could have had a really big impact.
Yeah.
But I also don't blame her. Because she's damned if she does, and she's damned because if she doesn't, then she's a pussy who's just going to sit there and take it. So she either stands up for herself and says, I'm not going to be a part of something like this, or she doesn't. And at the end of the day, it was Vince who put those events in motion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's looking at sort of these events with the question of what could have been through a contextual lens as well.
Yeah.
I can absolutely agree with that for sure. And
just to quickly piggyback on what she said, like it's easy to say and like, give criticism to her for when she didn't do it, but in that world when she's alone, it's easy to see it from another view. It's easy to see it from if she felt alone, she must have been alone.
Yeah.
To take on a juggernaut of an entire company by yourself, that's a task. That's a task that not a lot of people are built for.
It is. It is. It shows that the women's wrestling in general has been through such the ringer throughout its history in the business. But I really agree with Lucy in like echoing her disappointment that Wendy Richter just decided to leave, because in a lot of ways I can go back to the situation with CM Punk, where CM Punk, I feel like he made an impact with leaving the WWE, but he could have made such a bigger impact by leaving the WWE and going to a Ring of Honor or a New Japan. Whereas Wendy Richter, she didn't have as much choices as CM Punk, but she could have went to Japan, where women's wrestling was prominent and being respected, and could have been vocal about how she was treated in the WWF, and maybe it would have had an impact on the industry as a whole. So there was ways for her to kind of combat it, but choosing to leave the business completely kind of didn't help it as much as I would say that she has a part in the reason why women's wrestling was treated the way it was for the years after that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So that is the episode. The Fabulous Moolah, Dark Side of the Ring. Any final thoughts or words from you guys? Top guy JJ, start off with you.
I think it was culminated off pretty well, and I think we just kind of ended it on that note. It's just to realize how hard things were for women back then. And then to not have the outlets or the resources, or to be able to really seek other ways to handle these things, and probably not getting a lot of help.
Yeah.
Probably wasn't getting a lot of help. So it's like I kind of see it from both sides, and I gotta play the advocate of seeing, like, Wendy was probably not strong enough to handle all of that stuff, but she probably just didn't have anybody by her side to help her.
Or the
like
tools.
in that aspect, because that's a tough battle. That is a really, really tough battle to deal with the most powerful woman in professional wrestling, which is the Fabulous Moolah. Now she has a bankroll in Vince McMahon that has basically her back, and the largest wrestling company in the world. You don't need more than just yourself for this stuff to be believable. It's like you against a brand by yourself, and this is in the 80s. So like, where you're getting this help from? like where is this help coming from? Is this a resource? Like, we don't have the internet the way we now. We can't take a picture, snap it, and post it, and then you'll be seeing all these sympathetic people, and they're gonna join in on your cause. There's no joining in on no causes, because you can't do nothing with a Polaroid camera.
There's no GoFundMe.
Yeah, there's no internet. There's no way to reach out people. You need to know people's phone numbers, and you need to know people's mailing addresses. That's all you was getting.
It's pretty much true. Like, it was very limited, the amount of communication that was available to us in those days. But I just feel like there was more that could have been done.
Yeah.
So that is all. What you said, Krssi?
I said I wish it was more that could be done. I think that she could have been a huge superstar, and it's unfortunate. She just like, what, I just don't want to do this no more. I think when you're not having fun, you don't want to do it. And I think that since she wasn't having fun, and they kind of like diminished her light was shining, and then this woman like put it out, like blew it out, and it was just like she didn't want to bring it back out. So it's sad. It's sad that her light was like, burnt out, and she couldn't find her way back, because she had the potential of being someone really, really big. And it's ended like you guys said, Vince did this, so he could have brought this back and resurrected her career, but they just he could have like talked her back and said, hey, we want you to come back. Like, he didn't do that. He kept calling Moolah back, but he never called her back.
Yeah.
Nope. He chose his horse in the race, and he stuck with it for over 40 years. So that is all for this episode of Dark Side of the Ring. We have now reviewed every single episode of Dark Side of the Ring. So I want to thank Lucy T WWE for joining us, and I think that the best thing that I could suggest coming off of this episode, and since you've been mentioning it a few times, I think the next documentary we should review is Lipstick and
Lipstick and
Dynamite.
Dynamite.
I was
Yes,
gonna say that when
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
were done. Yeah,
please.
I was
I
gonna
will gladly join again.
I was gonna say I wanna invite you live on this video. Will you join us again for Lipstick and
Yes.
Dynamite review?
Yes, of course. And I do also want to say I just had an idea. I think I might be posting on my Instagram Lucy T WWE for anyone who's watching or listening. If you want this book, I will mail it to you. Let's do like a Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants and let's all read this amazing book of women's wrestling and send it on for free.
So you can see Lucy T's Instagram, her social media are in the description below for this video, so you can check that out. Click on there, check her out on Instagram, and contact her. And let's get this book circulating among female wrestling fans and male wrestling fans. All wrestling fans need to learn about this history because it's very important. Yeah. So thank you once again to Lucy T for joining us.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much.
Of course, we got the princess of all the true heels, Miss Krssi Luv. It's been great reviewing season 1 of Dark Side of the Ring with you.
Yes, so much fun. I can't wait for the next one.
And of course, our resident True Hill alcoholic, top guy JJ. I appreciate you joining us on the journey through season 1.
Yes.
It's been fun, man. It's actually been really, really cool. And are we gonna do our classic rankings of where this episode ranks? You know, like, you know.
All right, yeah. I think that's the last thing that we should touch on for sure is where does the Fabulous Moolah episode rank in season 1 of Dark Side of the Ring? I will start off the conversation, and I will say that this is right above Gorgeous Gino, right below the last of the Von Erichs and the Bruiser Brody episode.
Wow, you ranked yours high.
Yeah, I got the Von Erichs. The Von Erichs and the Bruiser Brody are my top episodes of season 1 of Dark Side of the Ring, but this Fabulous Moolah episode is just below there because there's so much history and controversy surrounding it, and so much new stuff that I learned watching this episode more than the others. Except probably the closest I would say that I learned a lot was Gorgeous Gino, but this one was a little bit more meat on the bone.
Yeah.
How about you, Krssi?
Mine, I put it up. We had number 1 as the Von Erichs. I have Bruiser Brody. I'm gonna give it number 3.
Okay, that's fair. That's right where I have it. Top guy JJ.
Completely agree. That's the straight number I have for it. I was like, it left with such a cliffhanger that it was so goddamn good that it would have been number 1 if it would have been completed. But it loses a couple of notches because there was still so much more information needed. But it was definitely a lot of information, very filling, very satisfying with just what we are digging into. So yeah, number 3 for me.
So I don't know how much you saw of season 1 of Dark Side of the Ring, Lucy, but where does this rank in documentaries that you've seen?
I mean, I would say that for Vice, I know that Vice is primarily a very male-dominated viewership, so I'm at least thinking it would probably be in the top 3 for me as well, to sort of help men kind of get a perspective of what it was like for women, what it continues to be like for women, not just in wrestling, but in every industry, and sort of how all of the intricate nuances that go into that. But again, Lipstick and Dynamite is way better, baby. So looking forward to that.
Can't wait to see it.
I am looking forward to our next review for Lipstick and Dynamite. So for Lucy T, for Miss Krssi Luv, for Top Guy JJ, you guys watching at home know what to do. Push the like button, push the iCard down at the bottom to subscribe, and the bell to stay notified. Put your comments down below in the comment section and let us know what you thought about the Fabulous Moolah Dark Side of the Ring episode and where it ranks in all of the season 1 episodes. So it is me, your True Hill Phenom SP3. This has been Dark Side of the Ring season 1 review for the Fabulous Moolah, and we are signing off until next time.